Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA Karen stories. In this video, I came home from overseas deployment to find strangers swimming on my property. An HOA had seized my property, built a clubhouse, and then had the nerve to tell me, the owner, that I was trespassing. Let's dive right into the video. And the title HOA story starts like this. I bought my property long before I ever set foot in a war zone. Back then it was just a rundown little farmhouse with a sagging porch and a big piece of scrubby land outside a sleepy town. The realtor called it a fixer-upper with potential, which is translation for nobody else wanted it, but it was cheap, it backed up to a small creek, and it was something I could actually afford on junior enlisted pay and a VA loan. The plan was simple: fix it up over time, rent it out while I was deployed, and eventually come back and turn it into a quiet place to be left alone. No neighbors breathing down my neck, no barking sergeants, no one making me wake up at 5 unless I wanted to see the sunrise, and then life happened. Deployments stacked up between training, overseas rotations, and getting sent to places that mostly existed as dots on maps and headlines. I was not exactly coming home every weekend to mow the lawn. I paid a local property manager to handle things, and they found a couple long-term tenants, mostly older folks who didn't care about fancy and just wanted some cheap rent. The place more or less paid for itself. Years went by like that, and when I finally got out, I had this idyllic picture in my head that I would come back, spend a few months fixing the house myself, and maybe start something small, a handyman business, firearm instructions, whatever. I just wanted my own land under my boots again, without sand or people shooting at me. Well, what I did not expect was to turn off the highway and find a master planned subdivision where my quiet dirt road used to be. I remember slowing down and just staring at it. Instead of fields and woods, there were rows of identical houses with identical driveways, identical mailboxes, trimmed trees, and so on. There were speed bumps, little children at play signs, and of course a big fancy stone monument at the entrance that said Karen Mafia Estates, name change for privacy reasons by the way, a deed-restricted community. My stomach dropped. I checked the GPS again, same road name, same intersection. I drove a little further, thinking maybe I'd gone the wrong way. But then I saw it. My old driveway was still there, kind of. It cut off from the new main road at a weird angle, like an afterthought. On one side of it was a tidy row of houses, on the other side was something I definitely did not remember, a huge stucco building with big glass doors, a covered patio, and a gleaming blue swimming pool behind a metal fence. There were umbrellas, lounge chairs, a grill area, even a little playground attached with brightly colored slides. A sign out front that said Mafia Community Clubhouse and Pool Residents Only. The building sat exactly where my back pasture used to be, and for a second I honestly thought I'd made a mistake or something. Maybe I was misremembering the layout. But the driveway curved the shape of the creek line behind everything. That was my land. I had walked it in the dark with a rucksack on my back, thinking about what I would do when I was not constantly tired. And yeah, I knew that land better than most bases I had been on. I drove slowly down my own cracked driveway, weaving between two SUVs parked halfway across it like they owned the place, and at the end, past a line of scrub trees, my sad little farmhouse was still there. A new roof, fresh paint at least. My property manager had done something. The last tenants had moved out a few weeks earlier, so the place was empty and quiet. I parked, got out, and just stood there looking back towards the brand new clubhouse and pool, its stucco wall practically hugging what I was pretty sure was my property line. You know that feeling when something is wrong and your brain has not caught up yet? I had exactly that. It was like the first time you hear incoming mortar fire and your body reacts before your brain fully processes what the sound is. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, walked through the house and dropped my duffel on the floor of the old bedroom and went straight out the back door towards this pool. From the rear it looked even more insane. The big pool deck and a good chunk of the building itself appeared to sit squarely where my pasture used to start. The fence ran down to the creek line I knew and then curved back in a way I'd never seen before. As I was standing there, some kid cannonballed into the pool. A couple of parents sat in lounge chairs and the smell of sunscreen and charcoal floated in the air. It looked like a resort or something, except the nice resort was clearly sitting in my backyard. A woman had spotted me through the fence and she narrowed her eyes and marched over like I just peed in the deep end.
"Excuse me,"
she called, voice dripping with authority.
"this area is for residents only."
I raised an eyebrow. I own this property. The lady gave me a quick once-over, taking in the beat-up truck, the faded duffel, and the fact that I was still in an old unit t-shirt.
"Uh-huh,"
she said.
"and I'm the Queen of England." This is Karen Mafia HOA common property. If you're renting somewhere nearby, you need to use your assigned access gate.
She actually pointed towards the sidewalk like she was directing a lost child. I felt a laugh bubble up, but it came out more like a snort. Pretty sure this is my backyard.
Pretty sure it's not, she shot back. The clubhouse is for dues-paying members. You cannot just wander back here because you see a pool. That's trespassing.
I opened my mouth to ask who she was, but she was already turning away, calling out,
"If you have an issue, take it up with the HOA board." "We've already had enough law and order types around here."
She said law and order types like she was saying plague rats. I stood there for another second watching her rejoin her little circle of friends. They started whispering and glancing over, all smug smiles and tight ponytails. One of them looked directly at my t-shirt, read the old unit name on it, and made a face like she had just tasted something sour. Alright, I thought, this is gonna be fun. That was my first meeting with the HOA. My second one came the next morning in the form of a note taped to my front door. "Dear homeowner," it began, which was funny because they clearly didn't know my name. "As you are aware, Karen Mafia Estates is a deed-restricted community governed by the Karen Mafia HOA. All properties in this subdivision must comply with recorded covenants and restrictions. You are currently out of compliance in the following areas." They had bulleted items, of course, the so-called unsightly truck in my driveway, the unapproved flagpole, my old battered flag holder on the porch, and landscaping not consistent with community standards. At the bottom was a printed name that said HOA President and a phone number. I leaned against the doorframe and laughed. I'd seen some ridiculous stuff in my life, but this was up there. My property predated this damn subdivision. I had bought it outright, no mention of any HOA in my closing documents. The house had been there when half these people were still in high school. I tossed the letter on the counter, grabbed my laptop and headed to the county recorder's website. It took me maybe 10 minutes to pull up my parcel info and the subdivision documents, and sure enough, there it was. My lot, shaded differently, with a note in the development documents that said, "Excluded parcel existing single-family residence." The subdivision literally wrapped around my land like a horseshoe, and then I pulled up satellite imagery. The new clubhouse and pool sat smack on overlapping parcel lines, some on HOA common area, some on my land. The fence behind the pool hugged my creek line in a way that only made sense if somebody had decided the creek was the boundary and ignored the actual survey. I took a screenshot and just sat there staring. So essentially, someone had built a whole damn clubhouse and pool partially on land that did not belong to them. While I was overseas getting shot at, they were having board meetings and ribbon cuttings on my dime. I should have lost my temper right then and there, but instead something in my brain flipped into the calm, cold place it always went when things got serious. You can be angry later, but right now you need information. So I started gathering exactly that. First stop was the old file box I'd left in the bedroom closet before my first deployment. It still had my purchase documents, the original survey and the closing statement. No mention of any HOA. The survey clearly marked the rear property line, running much further back than where the new fence sat. Next I called the property manager I had used. "Hey, it's OP, I said. Quick question, when did they put in a subdivision around my place?" He laughed, nervous. Oh yeah, developer came in a few years back. We got notices about roadwork and stuff, but since your parcel was technically separate, they didn't need your approval beyond easements at the front. Everything on the back was still on yours as far as records go." "So, the clubhouse?" I asked. And a long pause. "From the paperwork we saw, the HOA thought they had bought enough land from the developer for common use," he said carefully. "There were some survey issues at the time. I assumed they'd worked it out with you directly when they built the thing." "Well, they didn't," I said. Did anyone from the HOA ever contact you about it?" "A couple of years ago, yeah," he said. "They wanted your info. We gave them your mailing address from the original lease but never heard more. They assumed you were unreachable, I guess. They've been acting like they own that whole back stretch." I thanked him, hung up, and stared out the back window at this HOA clubhouse again. The afternoon sun was glinting off the water, some kids were splashing, a guy in mirrored sunglasses who looked like he had never missed a leg day grilled burgers on what had been my flat spot for a shed. I was not mad that they enjoyed the pool, I was mad they decided they were entitled to build it on land that I paid for without even asking. A couple days later I met the HOA president in person. I had filed the original survey and the new documents into a neat folder and walked over to the clubhouse during one of their board meetings advertised on a sandwich board out front. I figured starting semi-civil might save me some time. Inside, it smelled like new carpet and air freshener. There were maybe 8 people seated at folding tables, a mix of retirees and over-caffeinated young professionals. At the head of the table sat the woman from the pool, the one with the floppy hat minus the hat plus a clipboard. She saw me and immediately frowned.
"This is a private meeting," she said. "Residents only."
"I am a resident," I said. "I own the farmhouse down there." One of the board guys squinted. "Ah, the old house. I thought the developer bought that out." "Nope," I said. "Still mine." The president rolled her eyes.
"Look, we don't really have time for whatever this is. If you're a tenant, talk to your landlord. If you want to complain about a violation, there's a form."
"I'm not a tenant," keeping my voice level. "I'm the owner, and I think we have a serious problem here with where this building is sitting." That got their attention. The president's smile went tight.
"We had all the proper permits," she said. "Everything was done to code. This clubhouse is community property. It's not up for debate."
I stepped forward and laid the old survey and the printed map on the table side by side. "According to the county," I said, tapping the lines, "your building and pool are about 30% on HOA land and 70% on mine." There was a beat of silence while they all leaned in. One of the older guys picked up the survey and held it closer. "This shows the original parcel lines," he said slowly. "This section here, that's where the deep end is." He looked up at the president. "Karen, did we ever get a recorded deed for that section?" Her name was actually Karen. I almost laughed. She bristled.
"The developer said it was included in the transfer," she snapped. "We have a general description that matches the common area, and we voted on it, and people paid dues for this."
"Well, voting does not trump land records," I said. She turned on me.
"Maybe where you came from. Yelling solves everything, huh? But here we handle things peacefully. This is not the army. You don't just barge in and throw papers around because you think you're right."
I blinked. I didn't yell.
"You're being aggressive," she said, glaring at my shirt again. "This is exactly why some of us have objected to having military people in this neighborhood. Guns, trauma, that whole vibe. This is a family community."
A couple of board members shifted uncomfortably. "I've been back for 3 days," I said. "I've done nothing but unpack and cut the grass."
"Well, now you're trying to steal our pool,"
she snapped.
"I don't care what some old piece of paper says. The board approved this clubhouse, the community voted for it, and the developer told us—"
"The developer does not own my land," I cut in. "Never did. He wrapped his subdivision around it." She crossed her arms and said,
"If you want to claim this is your land, get a lawyer. Until then, you stay off the pool deck unless you pay dues like everybody else. And take that flag down." By the way, we had a whole discussion about flags. This is not a military base.
I looked at her for a long moment. "Good talk," I said finally. "I'll take your advice." Then I picked up my papers and left. I did not take the flag down. Instead, I took her advice about the lawyer. The property attorney I found came recommended by another veteran in a neighboring town. An older guy, calm, the kind of person who could probably read tax code without falling asleep. I brought him my file, my screenshots, the letter from the HOA, and the notes about what Karen had said. He flipped through everything twice, then leaned back and let out a low whistle. "Well, they've really stepped in it," he said. I nodded. "That's what I thought." In plain English, he said, "If we are right and the structure encroaches on your parcel to this extent, you've got a classic case of trespass and encroachment, and not a small one. This is not some fence over the line case. They dropped a permanent building and pool on your land without permission. So what are my options?" He ticked them off on his fingers. "You can be charitable and grant them an easement or sell them that strip at fair market value. You can force them to remove the encroachment or you can sue for damages, loss of use, unjust enrichment, maybe even punitive damages if we can show that they knew or should have known that they were on your land." "I'm not feeling charitable," I said. He smiled a little. "Thought you might say that. Then we do this right. First we get a current survey to confirm exactly where the lines and structures sit today. Then we quietly gather every record we can, permits, HOA minutes, emails, anything that shows who knew what and when. Once we have that, we send a demand letter, and if they are smart, they will panic and settle. If they are dumb, we let them keep digging," I said. He nodded. "Exactly. How patient are you?" I thought about nights sitting in dusty rooms waiting for go time, months away from home, and years cut into choppy pieces. "I can do patient," I said. So that's what we did. The surveyor came out a week later with a tripod and a laser. I walked the property with him while he staked the lines. He had done plenty of angry fence neighbor surveys, but when we got to the pool, his eyebrows went up. "Yeah, this is bad," he said. "Your original survey was not wrong. They just built right over it. The rear edge of the pool and half the deck are on your property. The utility lines they ran, also on you. And see this corner of the clubhouse? That's over by a good 10 feet. Could this be chalked up as an honest mistake?" I asked. He hesitated. "Maybe if they just fenced a bit too far, but this? Someone ignored something. The developer knew your lot was excluded. It's right there on the map." I paid him, took the new survey and dropped it off with my lawyer. That is when the real fun began though. While my lawyer dug into permits and records, I played nice. I did not yell, threaten or wave my DD-214 around. I went about quietly fixing up my house, painting, replacing broken steps, cleaning up the old shed and so on. The neighbors saw me as the guy with the old truck and the big dog. A couple of them introduced themselves, clearly curious about the mystery farmhouse, and most of them were fine, nice even. They'd been told by the developer that my place would eventually be brought under the HOA and were genuinely surprised to learn that was not legally true. Karen, on the other hand, treated me like a war crime in cargo shorts. Every few days I would find another violation notice taped to my door or stuffed in my mailbox. Parking, grass height, building materials visible from the street, flying a non-approved flag without approval, using military equipment, my old storage container, as a shed. And by the way guys, if you would be in OP's shoes and you literally just returned from a war zone / deployment and someone built this kind of crap on your private property without permission, what would you have done? Would you have been as patient as OP? Let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, please don't forget to like the video if you enjoy the long stories. So in short, I ignored them all. Carefully, I made copies of each one, noted the dates and filed them. One afternoon I came home from a hardware run to find Karen standing in my front yard, hands on hips, staring at my flag. "What did the flag do to you?" I asked, stepping out of the truck. She jumped and then sneered, "We have specific guidelines for flags. Sizes, placement, types. You cannot just hoist whatever you want because you feel patriotic that day. This is not a military base." "It is my house," I said. "And that flagpole was here before your HOA existed." She sniffed. "We voted on this. The community decided. The rules apply to everyone." "I didn't vote," I said. "I was on another continent." She pursed her lips. "Violence is not an excuse to break the rules. Some of us chose peace. I don't see why your personal history should give you special treatment." "You mean my service?" I said. "I mean your job," she said. "I don't support what you people do." We then had a whole discussion about not encouraging that culture here. Guns, flags, uniforms, it upset some of the children, she said. "Maybe teach them what it means instead of being scared of some clothing," I said. Her eyes flashed. "You're being hostile again. I should report you for threatening a board member." "I literally just got out of my truck," I said. "And you're towering," she said, actually writing something on her clipboard. "You know, some veterans struggle to adjust. I have research articles. You cannot just move in and intimidate people into letting you do whatever you want." I smiled, slow and unfriendly. "You're absolutely right," I said. "I cannot intimidate anyone into anything." I pointed towards the clubhouse. "But lawyers can." She blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You will see," I said, walked inside and shut the door. Inside, away from her, I finally let myself grin. Because while she was busy writing me up for the crime of just existing, my lawyer had just emailed me copies of building permits and HOA documents. It turns out the HOA knew there was a problem almost from the start. From when they were planning the clubhouse, there was a line, "Question raised regarding farmhouse parcel and rear boundary." There was also a note that the developer had assured them everything was fine and that any remaining issues could be cleaned up later by simply adjusting deeds. They had gone ahead anyway because the developer wanted to sell houses and the buyers wanted a pool. Their attorney had even warned them in a memo that any encroachment would need to be resolved with the owner of the excluded parcel. They had never bothered to resolve it. My lawyer drafted a demand letter that made my military planning look half-hearted. It laid everything out. The original survey, the new survey, the maps, the permit records, the board minutes. It politely but firmly stated that the Karen Mafia HOA had constructed significant improvements on my land without my knowledge or consent, in knowing disregard of clear property records. The letter gave them two options. Option 1. Remove all structures and improvements from my land at their expense within a reasonable time frame, restore the land to its prior condition as much as reasonably possible, and pay me damages for loss of use and trespass. Option 2. Negotiate a purchase of the portion of my land they had encroached on at 3 times fair market value plus damages, legal fees, and a permanent easement fee. If they refused or tried to drag their feet, the letter said we would file suit for trespass, ejectment, and damages, and we would name individual board members personally for their role in knowingly continuing this encroachment. My lawyer sent its certified mail to the HOA's registered agent and, just for good measure, emailed a copy to the board. The next week was entertaining. Karen showed up on my porch half an hour after the email hit. She didn't knock, she pounded. I opened the door and leaned against the frame. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, waving the letter like it was a parking ticket. "Are you insane?" "Morning," I said. "You cannot do this," she snapped. "You cannot sue an entire neighborhood because you want more grass. This clubhouse is for the community.
People rely on it, children swim here, it's a safe, non-military environment. You want to destroy it out of spite?
I want you off my land, I said. How you do that is up to you. She jabbed a finger at my chest.
You knew about this for months and you waited until now? That's sneaky, that's like something you would do in a war.
You mean planning? I said.
Manipulating, she said. You could have come to us like a normal person. Instead, you went behind our backs with some ambulance chaser. Are you trying to trigger my anxiety?
I stared at her. You built a pool in my backyard while I was deployed.
The developer told us…
The developer is not on the deed, I said. I am. She took a step back, clutching the letter.
You're going to be responsible for kids losing their pool, she said. Do you understand that? Do you want that on your conscience? Didn't you already do enough damage overseas?
There it was. Talk to your lawyer, Karen, I said quietly. I'm done talking on my porch. Then I closed the door in her face. A week later, the lawsuit was filed. I won't bore you with all the legal back and forth. It took months. The HOA's lawyer tried every angle. Adverse possession didn't apply. Prescriptive easement also didn't apply. Some nonsense about implied consent because I hadn't popped out of the ground during construction to stop them while I was literally in another hemisphere. My lawyer patiently swatted each argument down. The fact that they'd been warned in their own minutes and built anyway, that didn't look great for them. The fact that they'd been harassing me with bogus violations while knowing there was a boundary problem, that also didn't help. The best part was the depositions. They had to sit board members down under oath and ask them what they knew. Karen in particular did herself absolutely no favors. My lawyer told me afterwards that when asked why they hadn't contacted me to resolve the boundary question before construction,
she said, "We tried, he was off doing military things. We were not gonna reward that by bending over backwards. This community voted for peace and family values."
The court reporter apparently paused, slowly looked up and then kept typing. When asked if she understood what trespass was, she said,
"That's when people like him come back and think they're in charge."
It's amazing how someone can make themselves unlikable on paper. We eventually ended up in a mediation room. On one side of the table, me and my lawyers. On the other, Karen, two other board members who looked like they regretted life choices, and their clearly exhausted attorney. The mediator went through the usual script about settling, saving time, money, blah blah blah. Then he got right to it. "Here's the situation as I see it," he said. "The surveys and records show that the clubhouse and pool encroach significantly on OP's property. The law in this state is pretty clear. The HOA does not have a right to build permanent structures on land it doesn't own, regardless of what the developer told you. OP is entitled to a remedy." Their lawyer sighed. "We're willing to pay fair market value for the strip," he said. "We've had it appraised. We can offer…" My lawyer slid down our own number across the table, 3 times theirs plus legal fees and a yearly easement fee. Karen nearly choked.
"That is extortion," she hissed.
"Well, it is compensation for years of trespass and for giving you the luxury of not having to rip this thing out of the ground," my lawyer said.
"We don't have that kind of money," one of the other board members said quietly. "We would have to levy a huge special assessment. People will lose their homes."
"Or," my lawyer said, "you can just remove the encroachment, at your expense of course. Which, based on the contractor estimates we've gotten, will cost significantly more and leave you with a useless patch of deck and a structural nightmare." The mediator nodded. "The choice is between a painful surgery and amputation," he said. "I don't see a scenario where you walk away without scars." Karen glared at me like I'd personally dug the pool with my bare hands.
"This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're a soldier, you have benefits, why do you need this money?"
I actually laughed at her. "Because it's mine," I said, "and because you decided my land was your playground." The other board member rubbed his temples. "Can we have a moment?" he asked. They stepped out into the hall. Through the thin door, we could hear muffled arguing. Karen's voice was the loudest, using words like principle and "we cannot let him win." The others were using words like bankruptcy and liability. About 15 minutes later, they came back in. The exhausted attorney looked at me, then at my lawyer. "We can agree to your terms with some minor adjustments on the payment schedule," he said, "but we will need time to raise the funds." My lawyer and I had already talked about that. We were not trying to kick families out of their homes, we were just trying to punish the people who had been arrogant enough to build on my property. We agreed to structured payments over a couple years secured by a lien on the HOA's common funds and, if necessary, special assessments. They would pay my legal fees up front and they would also agree to record a deed transferring that portion of the land formally to the HOA, clearing the title once payment was complete until the last dollar was paid, though the property under the clubhouse stayed legally mine. They also agreed in writing to cease all enforcement actions against me and acknowledged that my parcel was not and had never been subject to their covenants. I walked out of that mediation feeling lighter than I had in years. See, HOAs don't have magic money trees. Every dollar they spend comes from the homeowners, and when the board sent out the notice about the so-called special assessment to resolve legal issues related to common amenities, it landed with a thud. People were furious. Turns out, a lot of residents had no idea their beloved clubhouse sat on someone else's land. They definitely had no idea the board had been warned years ago and just chose to ignore it. They absolutely were not thrilled to learn they'd be paying thousands of dollars over the next 2 years for what one neighbor loudly called Karen's pet project. I was not at the big meeting where it all blew up. I didn't need to be. Half the neighborhood filled me in over the next week about what happened. Apparently, someone leaked parts of the court filings onto the neighborhood Facebook group, excerpts from Karen's deposition where she ranted about military types and people like him. The survey overlays showing how much of the pool was on my parcel. There was a recall vote for the board before the week was out. Karen fought it, of course she did, and she went door to door telling anyone who would listen that I was exploiting a legal technicality and that if people cared about peace instead of property lines, this never would have happened. She called me a warmonger with a lawyer. It didn't matter though. The recall passed with something like 80% of the votes. She was removed as HOA president and from the board entirely. The other members resigned or were replaced, and a couple months later, I saw her moving out. One of the nicer neighbors told me quietly that she couldn't swing the special assessment on top of her already stretched mortgage. Between the legal mess, some unrelated drama she had stirred up, and the fact that half the neighborhood now saw her as the reason their dues had doubled, she was not exactly enjoying life in the Karen HOA. Last I heard, she moved to a quieter, non-militarized community across town. As for me, I put the settlement money to good use. First, I paid off the last of my mortgage. It's a weird feeling knowing nobody can take your house over a missed payment. Then alone made the whole mess worthwhile. Second, I used some of it to fix up my place properly. I rebuilt the porch, updated the wiring, turned the sad old shed into a decent workshop, got a proper flagpole too, anchored in concrete with lighting that met country code, but would probably have given Karen a stroke. Third, and this was the part that made me smile the most, I turned their mistake into something useful. Remember how the land under the clubhouse was technically mine until they finished paying? Well, my lawyer pointed out that as the owner, I had the right to grant temporary licenses for its use, as long as I didn't interfere with the HOA's contractual rights. So I made a few phone calls. Within a few months, on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the Karen Mafia family-friendly non-military clubhouse hosted a free support group for local veterans. Once a month, we did a cookout for vets and their families. A buddy of mine who ran a small non-profit helped organize it. Most of the residents loved it. There are more vets in those cul-de-sacs than Karen would have liked to admit. A couple of them told me privately that they had kept their service quiet because of comments she had made over the years, but now their kids splashed in the same pool while their parents swapped stories and grilled burgers. And the next one is a malicious compliance story, which is titled, "Manager insisted we do timesheets after hours." And by the way, guys, please don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy these XXL stories. So at our work, timesheets have to be filled in every fortnight on a Friday by close of business to be processed first thing Monday morning. Our manager was a really chill woman who would sign off on timesheets Friday morning and then send them to payroll before 5 p.m. She went on leave because her daughter was having a baby, and we got some young dude to temporarily fill in as manager. The guy was a total D-bag though. One of the things he did was insist we complete timesheets only after we had worked our fortnightly hours. This meant we had to work until 5, then get our timesheets signed, and then get them to payroll. Except payroll closes at 5, which meant we couldn't get our timesheets to payroll until Monday morning, and they would be processed late. So then we decided we would take our time fillings in timesheets. A lot of us hang around chatting on a Friday because there's a bar across the road that does cheap drinks 6 to 7 p.m. So we would leisurely do our timesheets and douchebag manager would have to hang around to sign them all. One week we didn't give them to him until right before 6 p.m. He was pissed. This lasted about 6 weeks. I guess something got flagged somewhere that our whole department was not getting paid on time. D-bag manager was quickly identified as the culprit and given the boot. They ended up getting one of my coworkers to take over until our real manager came back. And the next one is another malicious compliance story, and it is titled, "Don't work past 5? I understand." So I work for my parents in the real estate and farming industry. A few years ago, the agent in charge of collection of rent money got held up somewhere on the day we are supposed to check the validity of the payments made. I don't remember what the reason was at the moment, but I wanted to be done with the work on that same day. This endeavor had us working until 10 p.m., but I didn't care. At least the work was done. When I got home, I still lived with my parents at the time, my mother was livid and said, "What do you mean you worked until that late? Why didn't you postpone it until the next day?" Among other questions, and she then said that under no circumstance I was to work past 5 p.m. We rarely worked overtime, so I didn't give it much thought. A few weeks later, at around 4:50 p.m, my mother comes to the office with my aunt, her sister-in-law. This was not uncommon for her to do, and she usually only stayed for 5 minutes before leaving, but on this particular day she didn't leave as early, and 5 p.m. found her still in office. Cue the malicious compliance. 5 p.m. comes around and I start to pack my laptop, charger and mouse. She sees me packing and goes, "OP, where are you going? The day's not over yet." And I said, "But mom, you said that under no circumstance I was to work past 5 p.m. She just laughed it off, probably because my aunt was there, and that was that. And yeah guys, thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.